Good afternoon. The Committee on Judiciary and Home Affairs is called to order. It's Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022 at 2 o'clock in conference room 325. We have another number of items on the agenda today. First bill is Senate Bill 2021, Senate Draft 1. Vice Speaker, Vice Chair.
That upgrade. Right, relating to increasing the payment amount for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs pro rata share of the Public Land Trust. First up, we have the Department of Agriculture with comments. Okay, not present. Next up, AGs with comments.
Good afternoon, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Matayoshi, Craig Iha, Deputy Attorney General, providing comments. The legislature has the sole authority to determine OHA's pro rata share of the income and proceeds from the Public Land Trust. And we want to note that members of the general public are also beneficiaries of this trust. And the legislature should be mindful of the need to balance these other trust purposes and the needs of the other trust beneficiaries in setting OHA's share. I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Okay, thank you. Next up, DLNR in opposition. Any of the four, DLNR?
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, Chair, members of the committee, Russell Tsuji. We submitted testimony in strong opposition. We're available to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Next up, OHA in support. Partial support.
Good afternoon, Chair Nakashima and Vice Chair Matayoshi, members of the committee. I'm Na'u Kamali'i, the Chief Advocate for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Also present is our Board Chair, Hulu Lindsay. Also noting that all of the trustees of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs are present watching by remotely. We also have Counsel Sherry Broder in the event that there are questions. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs, governed by its Board of Trustees, who are elected officials, the power to manage, invest, and administer the pro rata portion of all funds derived from the Public Land Trust. It sought to set right its dispute with the state and fulfill its constitutional obligation and trust duties to Native Hawaiians by introducing HB 1474 and Senate Bill 2122. The bills were deferred by the House and the Senate. The Senate committee had amended SB 2021, a different vehicle, by replacing its contents with Senate Bill 2122 SD1, a substantially similar measure, a different vehicle, by replacing its contents with SB 2122 SD1. However, as further amended, is strikingly and alarmingly different. OHA supports the intent of SD1 inasmuch as to increase the payment to the Office Hawaiian Affairs. However, vehemently and unequivocally opposes the amendments which redefines OHA's 20% pro rata share of all income and proceeds. To address the impasse, however, OHA proposes an interim measure and to establish a working group to provide for support of legislation regarding OHA's annual pro rata share and past due sum of all income and proceeds of the Public Land Trust. We acknowledge that SB 2021 SD1, the measure before you this afternoon, recognizes the state's trust obligation under Article 7, Section 6 of the Hawaii State Constitution to Native Hawaiians. Further, that the state must uphold its trust responsibilities and duty of care to Native Hawaiians to count for all ceded lands in the Public Lands Trust inventory account for all income and proceeds derived from the public lands trust and transfer a fair and just pro rata share of income and proceeds from the public land trust annually to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for the betterment of the conditions of Native Hawaiians. OHA concurs. The amendments, however, that OHA proposes to SD1 are as follows. With regard to the section 2 of this proposed bill, we ask that you delete it in its entirety. The proposed amendments to HRS 10-13.5, which addresses the use of the public land trust proceeds, sought to wrongfully codify 20% of the net receipts, which has always been 20% of gross receipts from the public land trust, or 15.1 million, whichever is greater, as OHA's annual share of income and proceeds of the public land trust, beginning with fiscal year 2022-23. OHA opposes those amendments to HRS 1013.5. And I'll just emphasize that the entire Board of Trustees of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs unanimously oppose this offensive change. Instead, knowing we have to work with the state to address this issue, OHA proposes an interim measure to establish 21.5 million as an interim annual sum, adjusted annually for consumer price index as OHA's annual share of the income and proceeds of the public land trust beginning July 1, 22. Currently, OHA receives 15.1 million annually. And that has been in place since 2012. B, to transfer the OHA the balance of funds contained in the carry forward trust holding account, which we refer to as the CAFTA account, as of June 30th, 22, projected to be approximately $31 million, established by the Director of Finance pursuant to Executive Order 66. Its initial intent was to address the shortfall should the state be unable to meet the 15.1 million cap. Well, that shortfall has certainly grown. And we'd like to ask that those monies be released so that Native Hawaiians and programs can be addressed, built, and those monies deployed to the community. Also, to require, of course, the continued annual accounting of all receipts from the ceded lands described in Section 5F of the Admissions Act. And finally, we are at this impasse. We have been for years trying to work this out with the state. We've sued, we've been at the table before, but we're resigned to continue working with the state on this issue. So we propose to establish a working group comprised of 3 members appointed by the governor, 3 members appointed by OHA. The focus being the work and not the politic. To A, account for all
Sorry,
ceded
that's
lands
been
in the
well
PL
over 2
Trust
minutes. You could start
inventory.
to conclude your testimony, please.
Account for all incomes and proceeds from the PLT. Transfer 20% pro rata share on income and proceeds to the PLT Trust annually to OHA for the betterment of the conditions of Native Hawaiians, including the past due sums that have grown substantially since 2012. Also, foreclosing that nothing in this working group or the engaging between the state and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs shall be deemed to acknowledge and disrespect the existence of continuing claims of Native Hawaiians to the income and proceeds of a pro rata portion of the public land trust under the Constitution. We think that this is fair to create this working group. We think that it's fair to address the interim number and it adjusted for inflation We think it's fair that the money from CAFTA be released. We think it's right and just that the state continue to work with OHA. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and council is here as well.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to remind the testifiers that we are limited to 2 minutes out of respect for all of the other testifiers as well. So if I ask you to start to conclude, normally I give you a little bit of time, but when I ask you to conclude, please start to conclude your remarks. Thank you.
Any
Okay,
questions?
next up, we have the Department of Budget and Finance with comments.
Neil Miyahiro for the department. We stand on a testimony with serious concerns with this bill.
Okay, thank you. Members, that's all the testifiers we have today. Any questions for any of the testifiers? Rep. Ward.
OHA, please. You don't have to use 2 minutes on answering my question. It's shorter than that, though. Is one of the biggest rubs here that they're going to say in this bill, 20% of the net versus the gross? And what's the implied differential in terms of dollar amounts? The gross is how much and the net is how much? What's the distance between the two?
There's a historical context to that, and I'll ask Ms. Roeder if she would answer your question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that very good question. Really, I think at this point in time, there's no knowledge of what the differential would be. I mean, the state is not a for-profit agency, right? It doesn't need to make a profit. And so to talk about using the net, it could even be zero, right? Because the state is going to be spending money on salaries and et cetera, et cetera. And so the lands that the public land trusts are, those are, lands from the Hawaiian Kingdom. So this is why there's a pro rata share, but it's always been since 1980 when HRS 10-13.5 was passed. It's always been the gross. This is the first time we've heard the use of net actually in a bill. Any
Thank
other
you very
questions?
much for that.
Okay.
Chair, I have a
Mahalo.
follow-up to OHA regarding taking this amended bill and going back to was there a suggestion gut and replace, or was it just like, hey, this amended bill is so bad, let's throw it out?
The amended bill is pretty bad. And I think that in particular, the net is absolutely positively unacceptable. And so we definitely don't want that to go forward. So we tried to come up with, to continue the discussion and to continue to work on the issue. I think we've come up with, 4 ideas as to what could go forward this year.
And is this retroactive?
Well, it would be to the extent that the money in the CAFTA fund, that's the excess over the amount set in Act 178. So that amount would go to OHA. That was one of our
So it's the
proposals.
300
It's sitting,
million?
it's just sitting there. Nobody's using it. OHA could use it for its beneficiaries, for education, for the homeless, for food security.
How big is
There's
that
so many
fund?
things.
How big is it?
I think it's approximately 30 million.
30 million.
30 million. But that's just sitting there
Okay,
and nobody's
thank
using it.
you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Chair,
Any
I do
other
have
questions?
a question.
Let me see if anyone else has.
Yeah,
one, and we'll come
sure.
back to you. Anyone else have any other questions? Rep. Nakamura.
do. Thank you, Vice Chair. I have a question for OHA as well. You're suggesting the creation of a working group to try to settle the 4 issues that you've described in your testimony. Wanted to find out how long do you think we need to give, if we go down this route, how long do you think the working group needs to address the concerns and come up with recommendations?
Well, we proposed 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. So,
And would you have any objections to some of the members being appointed by the legislature as well? There's three, that the governor who has a short time left in office. And then we have, the House and the Senate. Would you have any objections to?
I don't think there would be any objections. There was a working group, not a working group, but there was a group established previously, and it was attached to the governor's office for administrative purposes. So the governor called the meetings, but only one meeting was actually called.
And would you-
And for that one, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate did
Right.
appoint
Right.
somebody. So
I'm
we
sorry,
don't
one-
have any objections to that.
One follow-up related question. And who would you see convening this working group?
Well, I think we'd like to make sure that the meetings are held and everything. So I think the Office of Hawaiian Affairs would be willing to convene the group if that would be something that,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
Chair, did you have any questions? Otherwise, I never reported it.
Yeah, we're forward.
Report?
DLNR, are you still here? DLNR. DLNR.
Yes, yes, we're here.
Okay. You used the word, I think, vehemently opposed, strongly opposed. What's the gist and the crux of your strong opposition?
Sir, Ian Hirokawa with DLNR Land Division. The crux of it is that if we were to have to pay more, it would have a significant impact on our programs. I mean, especially with the numbers that, with the estimate of, what was it, 79 million as the pro rata share. I mean, we're one of the few agencies that generate any notable amount of ceded land revenues. And if we have to pay any more of that, like a $79 million amount, it would have a significant impact on our budget and our programs.
You're using the pronoun we. Where are you getting the we, that you are the
department.
payor?
The department.
Does the bill say the department's going to take it down from your budget?
Well, it doesn't say where it would be taken. So I guess the department assumes that it may be taken from us.
I don't know if that's an original assumption.
Representative, if I may, Russell Tsuji for
Please.
Land Division. In the past, there was a short. When Act 178 was enacted, 20% of the revenue of the entire state of Hawaii from public trust lands was less than 15.1. Someone had to make up the difference. DLNR Land Division made up the difference. How did we make up the difference? We set aside our pro rata share that was allocated for DLNR, i.e. 20% or roughly about that sum. The 80% that normally goes into our budget to help pay for the other public trust beneficiary under 5F, which is the land, protection of the lands and oceans and waters and public lands in the state of Hawaii. It goes back into that fund. What happens was with the public trust lands or ceded lands, the 80% was being put in under Executive Order 0606 into a trust holding account carry forward to cover any shortages. And so from that pot was used to cover the short during the early years. And so right now, today, when OHA is asking for, I see this pot of money is $30 million sitting, that was actually, the intent was when 20% does not even exceed the minimum that you must pay OHA, which is 15.1, somebody's got to cover it. And we want to make sure, the state wanted to make sure, the governor wanted to make sure that there was an adequate pot of money to be able to make its timely payment to OHA. I hope that clarifies if you.
Well, when you look at the greater we or the bigger we, the taxpayers, we, the finance committee, we, the WAM committee actually are the ones that fund these things. So I'm just wondering why, and I admit you guys got probably the biggest responsibility with the smallest budget, but to say that this is a direct hit on you, I just don't get that reasoning.
The reason we say that, sir, is because part of our budget includes the special funds that are generated from these, we don't get 100% general funds. A lot of agencies get 100% general funds. They don't have to worry about special funds. The legislature decided that we should try to generate a certain amount of money from these public trust lands to help support our department that is authorized under our special fund statute and in our budget. And that makes up for maybe what we would otherwise be asking for general funds. So in effect, it's taking away from the revenues that would have been or could have been used for the DLNR and its operations is what we're trying to say.
Okay, with the greater, Oha, you want to supplement that?
Yes, there were shortfalls in the beginning. We're talking about a bill that was passed in 2006, right? So this is what, 16 years later. And so it's been many, many, many years since there's been any shortfalls. Now there's an overage every year of several $1 million. And that's why there's the 30 million. And we think that because the initial calculations were based on the pro rata share, which was in effect at that time, in terms of what it would be calculated on, there's dispute about even that, those basic things, but just assuming for sake of discussion right now, it's been a long time since there's been a shortfall, but I think this is a perfect example of why a sit down to exchange figures, facts, information, so that maybe in the future, there'll be more understanding between the parties. I mean, obviously the agencies aren't gonna wanna give more money, right? They want the
That's
money
your
for
working
themselves.
group proposal. You
Yeah.
get locked into a room until you agree you can't come out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Got it.
definitely.
Okay, Thank
Yeah.
you very much. Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? If not, let's move on to SB 2567 SD1 relating to Native Hawaiian beneficiaries. We have one testifier here today, DHHL, with comments.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Tyler Ukepagom, Deputy to the Chairman. We'll just emphasize our request that if there is an opportunity to improve our existing systems with funding, we just ask that that does not affect the priorities identified in Governor's executive budget, and we'll stand on the remainder of our written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? All right, seeing none, let's move on to SB 3247 SD2 HD1 relating to Hawaiian Homelands. First up, DHHL with comments.
Tyler Gomes, Deputy to the Chairman. Again, in terms of our written comments, we just want to emphasize that the department does have a planning program in place that does allow for a lot of this. I can't speak to whether or not it would be duplicative, but I do think that our general plan, our regional plan, and our island plans do account for addressing some of the concerns of the bill, and we just offer those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Oh, Rep. Nakamura.
Thank you, Tyler, for your testimony. Are you, the testimony says that DHHL is working on a general plan. And when do you expect to have the general plan done?
Yeah, the general plan update should be completed this year. So I think we've already, have we done beneficiary? We've done beneficiary consultation. We've worked with the consultant. So the general plan update should be completed in 2022.
And I'm looking at your very old general plan, the one that was done in 2002. And I noticed that the general plan is very broad in nature. It covers the whole state and does not have specifics for each county. That's why when the bill came to the Housing Committee, we said, hey, if we're going to give you a pot of funds, it would be good to know, I think for the public and for government to know as well, how are you going to implement a big pot of funds that might be coming your way into something more strategic and something more county-based so that we can all understand the direction DHHL is going and then to hold the department accountable. So that's why this was written. And I guess so my follow-up question is when do you anticipate working on the strategic plan, which is the tier 2 section of your overall process? Because we know general plan is just
So
tier 1, very motherhood statement.
So our tier 2 is our island plans. And so those are updated every 10 years and not every island is not updated on the same. So we sort of have a rotating schedule of 10-year island plans updated. Within the island plans, that's where the commission approves the designation of which of our lands are used for which purposes, and that takes into consideration beneficiary input. And so that's how those 10-year increments are how we decide whether or not Kalailoa, for example, is going to be commercial and industrial versus another purpose. So those are updated every 10. I don't know which island plan is coming up next off the top of my head. I apologize.
One follow-up question, but you can go through it.
It's not, is it linked?
It's really.
If it's linked, then you should just go. through it.
Okay, and so I guess the island-wide plans are also land use plans, not how are you going to address the waiting list plan? So I think that's the distinction that I tried to make in this bill, so.
And I apologize, Representative. We weren't opposing the bill. I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of the existing planning, and however we can incorporate all of that, we will be sure to do so.
Thank you.
Report, did you have questions?
Following those questions, I have also had a chance to look at your last plan. And I don't see any timelines or measures of accomplishment. I just see general statements that we will do this, we'll do that, but there's nothing that says, but when you'll do it and how you'll do it. Is your existing plan that you're making is similarly vague and general as this one of the 2002 vintage? Question mark.
I appreciate the feedback, Representative. What I will say is that it will set the aspirational tone for how the department approaches the next 20 years of development. That's the purpose of the general plan. So if that is reading as vagaries, I mean, as being vague, then we will be trying to set the course for the next 20. Specificity would have to come in the form of the island plans. However, you are right. There are no timelines because largely our projects are contingent upon funding at each stage of development. And so it's very difficult outside of our 5-year development pipeline to say that we know for sure this project in Maui is going to be completed in the next 8-12 years. That's a little more difficult for us, just given the unreliability of funding.
Let me ask you the most difficult question. Given your plan that you said is almost in the making, somewhat out of the oven shortly of being big, when is the wait list of 28,000 plus people to be whittled down to something that's more manageable? Or when it, quote, disappears? What is your plan say?
The plan doesn't speak to eliminating the wait list, Representative. And what I will add to that is, in addition to my testimony that it's largely dependent on funding, last year as a result of exploring gaming, we were able to calculate that, I mean, it's over 150 years before we'll clear the wait list if nothing changes. And that's simply based on the current production pipeline and the availability of state funds for those purposes. So no, the plan will not give a detailed timeline of when the wait list will be eliminated.
I'm glad you mentioned the word funding because, you know, there's 600 million that's floating your way, at least is on its way through the Senate and the House. Something like this bill will help give you credibility in that you're going to be utilizing it in a very strategic plan, not loosey-goosey and kind of like, well, we didn't really know what we're going to do with it because the legislature is putting an investment in what you guys are going to do, and we want to make sure you do it. That's the bottom line. So you are opposed or for the bill?
We offered comments. We're not
okay.
opposed to the bill. And if
Okay, got it. By the way, you have a nice aloha shirt on.
Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to SB 3195 SC2 relating to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. You're up again, Tyler, DHHL, in support.
Aloha mai kako. On this matter, we strongly support. I'll stand on our written testimony on this one. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, members, any questions? Rep. Nakamura.
Tyler, I just wanted to find out, are there potential sources of geothermal energy on your lands?
Do you have?
We can't be certain. It's worth exploring, particularly on, I think, Hawaii Island. There may be land. So I don't know for sure, and that will require a bit of science and geology that's outside of my level of qualifications in terms of predicting whether or not it's accurately there. But we know that it's worth exploring. And one of our commissioners is also, he works in geothermal. So I think his expertise has been helpful in guiding the department on whether or not this is an idea worth just considering.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Okay, if not, let's move on to SB 3357 ST2 relating to Native Hawaiian Affairs. First up, we have the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism with comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. DBED will stand on its written testimony offering comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, DLNR with comments.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay. Yeah, excuse me. The department stands on its written testimony and support.
Okay, thank you. Next up, or last up, we have Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement in support.
Aloha, Sterling Wong for CNHA. We stand on our written testimony and support. Happy to answer any questions. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions? All right, seeing none, let's move on to SB 2115 SD1 HD1 relating to the room confinement of minors. First up, we have DOH in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. My name is Dr. Kurt Humphrey. I'm the Medical Director for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division, State of Hawaii Department of Health. I am directly responsible for taking care of some of our youth who are in juvenile lockup facilities. I've done this for about 8 years now. I wanted to speak to this important bill that places some limitations and rules on room confinement for minors because I have seen firsthand the negative effects that excessive room confinement can have on kids' mental health. I have seen youth develop suicidal ideations. I've seen them self-harm. I've seen them become delusional and disoriented. I've seen all kinds of ill effects. So I wanted to give testimony today to make sure that you all knew that the harms that come to these kids from excessive room confinement is not just theoretical. It does really happen. And we need these rules and limitations in place to make sure that there are safeguards for our kids who are in lockup, as they're already quite vulnerable in and of themselves. But the excessive room confinement just adds to the burden of mental health issues that they face. So I wanted to make myself available to answer any questions that you might have, in case you were wondering how this actually impacts real life kids who are locked up in the judicial system. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry, one other thing. I do want to mention that I think we amended our testimony. Originally, we had, I think, said that we would like qualified mental health professionals to be doing the mental health assessments for the youth in lockup. And we just wanted to make the small correction that our system generally allows for mental health professionals who are supervised by qualified mental health professionals to make those judgments, as well as the qualified mental health professionals themselves. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we did receive your testimony. Next up, Judiciary in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee.
Yeah, for the people on Zoom.
I'm Carol Matsuoka on behalf of the Hawaii State Judiciary. We strongly support this measure as this is part of our judicial legislative package, and we thank you for this opportunity to testify. We stand on our testimony, and I will remain for if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Office of Youth Services in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Leanne Gillespie. I'm the Acting Executive Director for the Office of Youth Services. We stand on our written testimony in support and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And last up, ACLU of Hawaii in support.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Hope Kirpelman. I'm the Legal and Legislative Fellow with the ACLU of Hawaii. We strongly support this bill. Children should never be held in tiny cells for 22 to 23 hours a day for days and weeks on end, and this is still a problem in our state. The ACLU of Hawaii has received reports in the past of the misuse and overuse of juvenile solitary in Hawaii. Two examples being one child of Pacific Islander descent who was held in confinement for 31 days straight just due to verbal outbursts. The second example is another child who was held in solitary for 7 days just because she had head lice. This is a response to a medical problem, and the incident caused her suicidal ideation to return. The research is very clear that solitary confinement is actively harmful to adults, so you can imagine the more dire consequences for children. Many children in juvenile detention facilities already suffer from mental illnesses, and isolation only leads to more harm while failing to address the underlying causes of these problems. One study found that more than half of all suicides in juvenile facilities occurred when young people were held in isolation. Solitary confinement is also counterproductive. It does not work to deter violence. Research actually shows that extreme isolation causes increased antisocial behaviors, aggressive tendencies, and that these can persist in the long term. Several jurisdictions that have reduced the use of solitary have actually witnessed a decrease in prison violence. This bill effectively bans the use of room confinement for juveniles except in limited circumstances, which would bring Hawaii into alignment with the national standard. We urge the committee to pass this measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's all the testifiers we have. Members, any questions? Report.
The psychologist, or was the psychiatrist, I forget his title, the doctor.
DOH? The Department of Health?
Was it the Department of Health? The gentleman who spoke to
Department of Health,
the
are you still there?
negative.
Yes, hello. I'm still here.
There he is. I have a constituent who recently spoke to me about solitary confinement in the DOE. And it was the confinement, but the biggest thing that she emphasized that affected her daughter the most is that the light was off. Does this bill have anything to do with the light on or off, or is it the confinement in and of itself only? And is there any studies that you know of that the light being off confounds it even more or compounds it?
Well, I guess I will say regarding the light that when people are kind of locked in small rooms and they don't have really access to natural light, it can be really disorienting to kind of not know, is it daylight? Is it nighttime? What time is it? The hours seem to pass really slowly sometimes for kids when they're in there day after day after day. So having access to natural light is super important. And I'm sure it would also affect a person's mental state, whether the room light is on or off, or whether they even have the ability themselves to control whether the room light is on or off. That it's an important factor, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to SB 2481 SC2 HD1 relating to youth crisis centers. First up, we have the State of Hawaii Executive Chambers, Scott Morishige with comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members. Scott Morishige, Governor's Coordinator on Homelessness and Chair of the Hawaii Interagency Council on Homelessness. I'll sign my written testimony supporting the intent and offering comments. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Hawaii Youth Services Network in support.
Aloha, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Judith Clark, Executive Director of Hawaii Youth Services Network. We are in strong support of this bill. Youth who are living on their own on the streets are the single most vulnerable and most overlooked segment of our homeless population. We know that 40% of them were forced to leave home by their families, that over 3/4 of them report physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. They are at high risk of assault and exploitation on the streets. We feel this bill is much needed. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Okay, thank you. And last up, we have the Office of Youth Services with comments.
Yes, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and the committee. My name is Leanne Gillespie. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Youth Services. We will stand by our written testimony and be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Rep. Nakamura.
Thank you. I have a question for Office of Youth Services and one for the Coordinator of Homelessness. Thank you for your testimony. There seems to be a distinction here between a youth center versus a residential component of a crisis center. Do you feel that Office of Youth Services can do both?
So I'm not sure if I understand the question. We do currently have residential centers for homeless youth. We do that through procuring contracts with private vendors. What we're asking for is to combine youth service centers and crisis centers together to provide a holistic service center for youth at risk. So we can address both the residential needs and other sort of mental health, CSAC, substance abuse issues at the same time.
I see. And then do you see this expanding to the neighbor islands as well?
We do, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Report.
Same testifier. Why is a youth having to have a limit of 30 days as temporary shelter? What's the logic of that?
I believe that youth need more than 30 days. Representative?
Yeah, it's suggesting that a 30-day limit on the provision of temporary shelter per person to avoid the necessity of youth interacting with the legal system. What specifically is that referring to?
I do not know.
So can you have youth in your places longer than 30 days then, is the question.
I believe so. We currently do. I can double check on that.
Okay, that's the question I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Rep. Nakamura, did you have a follow-up?
No, that's it.
Okay. Okay, let's move on. SB 2397, ST2 HD1, relating to child custody. First up, we have the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. I'm Angie Mercado, Executive Director of the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I stand in written testimony of this measure with amendments to remove nationally accredited from the definition of domestic violence programs in Hawaii. As I explained in our testimony, there is no national accreditation process. And if the next question is, does the state have an accreditation process? No, it does not. I'm here and available for any questions you may have. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to SB 1347, ST1, HD1, relating to sex trafficking prevention. A bunch of testifiers for this one. First up, Department of Education with comments.
Oh, hi, good afternoon, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Matayoshi. I'm Heidi Armstrong from the Department of Education. We stand on our written testimony supporting the intent and offering comments. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Next up, we have the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women in support. Okay, not present. Next up, Department of the Prosecuting Attorney, Honolulu, in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Mark Tom for the department. Department stands on its written testimony in support. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Next up, Hawaii Youth Services Network in support.
Aloha, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Judith Clark, Executive Director of Hawaii Youth Services Network. We stand in support of this bill. Each year, Hawaii's young people come together at the Hawaii Children and Youth Summit to provide advice to our legislators about what Hawaii needs to be a better place to live, learn, and work. This year, human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, was one of their top priority issues. They strongly believe that teachers need training. Often they are the trusted adults that young people turn to confide in when they have been trafficked or have been approached in relation to sexual abuse and exploitation. Teachers need training to be able to respond appropriately when young people disclose to them. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Next up, Harm Reduction Hawaii with comments.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Tracy Ryan. I'd just like to comment that in response to a direct question from Donna Mercado Kim in a Senate hearing, the representative from the Department of Education said that this bill was quote unquote unnecessary. And the reason is they're already doing this and have been doing it for some time. They're doing it, as I understand it, with the Pacific Survivors Center, Ho'olnupua, and Susanna Wesley. I've talked to the person at Ho'olnupua, and I've talked to a woman named Toby Porter at the Department of Education, who was recommended to me by Deborah Smith from the Youth Outreach Project. You're having a bill to authorize the DOE to do something they're already doing. So it seems like we're spending a lot of time unnecessarily on this. I don't think anybody is against this. Everybody thinks it's a good idea. I think what needs to be done now is that we need to have a broader group brought in to discuss the curriculum, to include more about runaway, which is a very large problem, and to see what objections there may be from people in around the states who want to make sure that the information is age appropriate, that it's comprehensive, that it considers people in different situations. That process is ongoing. The DOE is working on this. They've already got a training up and running. So all you're doing by moving this bill forward is having additional legislative hearings on a bill that doesn't seem to actually accomplish anything, since what it's aimed to do is already happening. So that's my comment. I'm not against this. Nobody's against doing this. I just not sure that it's worthy of going forward to a finance committee and then possibly to a conference committee when the effect of the bill will not actually change anything that's happening.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Hawaii Children's Action Network speaks with comments.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to provide some testimony. My name is Nicole Wu with Hawaii Children's Action Network Speaks. In the last committee, this bill was actually weakened from saying that the department shall provide training to teachers, educational officers, etc., on sex trafficking prevention and response. And it was changed to the Department of Education may offer training, which makes the bill almost completely toothless. So our comment is that if you are going to pass a bill like this, that you revert back to the original language so that it actually has some more teeth. We certainly support the intent of this bill as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And members, we have a number of individuals with written testimony in support. Two should be here today. First up, Addison Rice in support. Not here. We only have one name here, only a first name, I guess. Liliana in support. I guess not. Okay, members, any questions?
Was the Department of Education on the line?
Yep. Oh, I believe so. Yep, they should have been the first up. Did you
I have a question for the Department of Education.
Oh, that's
There
right.
you are. Hi. So just wanted to clarify that you are already doing this?
Yes, we are. And we worked extensively for the past year with our AGs, with Representative Ichiyama was one, as well as Department of Human Services, one to revise our mandatory reporting form, because we are mandatory reporters, not only for child abuse, which now includes the section for sex trafficking, and accompanying that form is a mandatory video or training that all staff members receive at the beginning of every school year that gives an overview. It's not in depth, but it gives an overview of signs to look for and what to do if something is disclosed to you by a child, or if you're recognizing signs. So at least whomever the employee is, they have that knowledge to know where to go when this is presented to them, so that that child is going to be directed to the help that they need.
So, and that's a mandatory
It's a
training?
mandatory, we call it the opening of the school year packet. And we have a mandatory child abuse, we're mandatory reporters. So child abuse and neglect, as well as sex trafficking, is all in one document now and in one video.
So moving it from a may to a shall wouldn't really impact you because you're already doing it.
The general training of what to do when you're made aware of the signs to look for. There is more in-depth training that the schools can request, and that's where we partner with Ho'alanapua, Susanna Wesley Center, et cetera, where those agencies go to the school and provide deeper training. Can be for all personnel, it can be specific personnel such as counselors, school-based behavioral specialists, et cetera.
Thank you very much.
You're very
Appreciate
welcome.
Members, any other questions? If not, let's move on to SB 2770, SD1, HD1, relating to Native Hawaiian rehabilitation programs. First up, we have Department of Public Safety in support.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. Max Sultani, Department of Public Safety. We would stand on our written testimony in support of this measure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Women's Prison Project in support.
Aloha, Chair Nakashima and Vice Chair Matayoshi and committee members. My name is Melina Ka'ulukakui. I am a retired social worker and cultural practitioner of Hula. I also represent the Women's Prison Project and in strong support of this bill. Since 2016, I have been a volunteer at the Women's Community Correctional Center, and I established a hula halau there. And I have seen firsthand the healing power of culture as foundational for women who have experienced much pain in their lives. It has been well established that the impact on Native Hawaiians in the criminal justice system is disproportionate and stark, and I have included some resources for the committee to review. But what I really want to underscore is that trauma is a prominent factor in justice-involved women and often contributes to why they enter the system in the first place. Once incarcerated, trauma affects their institutional behavior, which in turn negatively impacts eligibility for limited treatment and rehabilitative opportunities, while often also extending their release dates. It is also well established that cultural historical trauma compounds individual trauma, and research with a variety of indigenous groups has also shown that when cultural historical trauma is present, then healing and rehabilitation from trauma must also include opportunities for cultural healing through cultural practices. So cultural is foundational. Thus, gender-specific, trauma-informed, culturally grounded services and opportunities for incarcerated women, overseen by knowledgeable providers well-versed in Native Hawaiian principles, are key to equipping them with practical and emotional skill sets critical for post-release success, which can also break the cycle of intergenerational trauma and recidivism. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your work, Melina.
Thank
Next
you.
up, we have the ACLU of Hawaii in support. Not present. Members, any questions? Yep, Rep. Board.
The public safety, please.
Yes.
My favorite question for the penal system, the rehabilitation system, is the recidivism rates. Do you have that by ethnicity, or do you know the Native Hawaiian recidivism rate by itself?
I don't think so, but we can take a look. It's the Interagency Council for Intermediate Sanctions does recidivism studies annually. We can take a look at it. I don't think it's broken down by ethnicity.
The recidivism rate is now what, 70% in 3 to 5 years, 60, depending on what study?
I think parole is about 50%, and people that complete their full term is about 60%. 3-year study.
And no idea how that is ethnically specified.
Yeah, I don't think it's broken down in that study.
It would certainly help this bill if it showed that there was a disparity in the recidivism rates, because this is a very specific Native Hawaiian cultural practitioner perspective. Okay, thank you. I hope that someday you will get that data, but for now, thank you for your presence.
Members, any other questions? If not, let's move on to SB 3295 SD1 HD1 relating to corrections, Department of Public Safety. First up with comments.
Good afternoon again, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Max Otani, Department of Public Safety. We'll stand on our written comments, noting the similarities between the measures in this bill and the current Hawaii Correctional Systems Oversight Commission. It was also recently brought to our attention that there could be a possible conflict in interest as the funding and the appropriation for this new proposed commission is placed in our budget. So the current Oversight Commission, currently their funding avenue sits with the Attorney General. So it may be a little bit, I think there is a conflict in interest if the commission that provides oversight of us, we're actually supporting it and appropriation is made to us.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Women's Prison Project in support.
Yes, thank you. Aloha, Chair Nakashima and Vice Chair Matayoshi. Thanks for the opportunity to testify on this. And I would say that I agree with Max Otani. There is another bill, House Bill 2312, which places this commission in the judiciary, which makes sense because many of the reforms that we're concerned with have to do with diverting women from the prison system, and we would be working closely with the judiciary on those items. So we would agree that the judiciary might be a better placement for this. So I want to talk about why this is really important. You have my written testimony, but I want to highlight a few things. As you know, there was a report in 2018 from the House Concurrent Resolution number 85, which was established in 2016. That task force, when it reported out in 2018, made a number in Chapter 10, made a number of very specific, gender-specific reform recommendations. Here we are 6 years later, and very few of those recommendations have actually been implemented. Now, here's one of the big issues. Although within the incarcerated population in this state, the percentage of women is higher than in any other state, women are still a small part of a large system of corrections that was developed primarily for a male population. It's very easy for women and their needs to get lost in the shuffle, and we see that often. We also know that that there are many women who could be assisted and diverted from prison through paying attention to women's specific risks and needs, which is one of the things that Women's Project is advocating for. I also want to emphasize that this is not a duplication of the work of the existing Corrections Oversight Commission. They're dealing with issues of the greater correctional system. This is a very specific bill. It's very narrowly focused. It's an implementation commission, which is specifically focused on implementing reforms for women in the justice system. Its scope is very focused. Its membership, it consists of women with the knowledge and expertise to effectively implement a specific range of reforms for justice-involved women.
Thank you, Linda. It's been 2 minutes. If you could start to conclude your testimony, please.
Yes, I will just stand on the rest of my written testimony, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Hearing none, let's move on to SB 2639 HD1 relating to the Comprehensive Offender Reentry System. First Step Department of Public Safety in support.
Good afternoon again, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Max Otani, Department of Public Safety. We'll stand on a written testimony. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And Linda, you're up again. Women's Prison Project in support.
Yes, thank you again. So this bill is really about being sure that we are accurately assessing women's needs as they begin to reenter into the community. We know that women's needs are different than men's. You know, there's a funny song in My Fair Lady, why can't a woman be more like a man? Well, we're not. And so the needs are different. And in order to identify correctly the needs, there needs to be a gender-specific needs assessment, which then means that we will have appropriate transition plans that will reduce recidivism. And this has already been shown in other places that when there is a gender-specific assessment of women's needs and a gender-specific plan developed, that recidivism goes down. So thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill.
Thank you. Any questions, members?
I have a question
Yeah, Rep. Nakamura.
for public safety.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Otani. I wanted to find out, your testimony says that this measure might not be needed because you're already doing this. Is that accurate?
What we are doing right now is we're describing a program specialist position to look into addressing issues with our female offender population. And one of the issues that we will be looking at is gender-based assessment tools. The Interagency Council and Intermediate Sanctions looked into gender-based assessment tools a while back, and there was one tool on the market at that time, but it wasn't practical or even we were able to afford the tool at that time. I'm not sure what the tools are currently on the market, but we would explore that issue and come back to the legislature next year in the event that additional funds is needed to support the new tool.
And then can I ask one more question?
Yep, let's go.
And so just wanted to also ask you, where does Department of Public Safety's role end once the client leaves the prison system? Where do you continue on to evaluate how they're doing?
No, we don't. So what happens is if they're sentenced to a jail term, upon their release from jail, our term ends with them. If they're sentenced to prison, if they're released on parole, then once they're released from our facility, our term ends with them also. They fall under the jurisdiction of the Hawaii Paroling Authority.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Members, any other questions on this measure? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to SB 3294 SD2 HD1 relating to reentry planning circles. First up, we have the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission in support. Okay, not present. Next up, Department of Public Safety with comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair, committee members. Again, we will stand on our written testimony offering comments on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women in Support. I don't think they're here for the previous one though. No, okay. Next up, Women's Prison Project in Support.
Yes, thank you. We are strongly in support of this program. The reentry planning for any incarcerated individual is vital for their successful return to the community. The thing that is significant about this process is that it engages the person in accepting responsibility and making amends as needed, and also engages the person's support system in developing a realistic plan for reentry. It has been shown to reduce recidivism, and that research has also shown that it's healing for the family members and for the children of the incarcerated person. So we are asking for an appropriation to continue these huaka'ihi or reentry circles for women coming out of the Women's Correctional Facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have the ACLU of Hawaii in support. Not present members, any questions? Yep, seeing none, let's move on to SB 2637 SD1 HD1 relating to public safety. First up, we have the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission in support. Are they here? Yep. Okay, still not here. Next up, Department of Public Safety in support.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. Max Otani again, Department of Public Safety. We stand on our written testimony in support of this measure. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women in support. Still not, okay. Women's Prison Project in support.
Yes, thank you. These furlough programs are a significant tool to reduce recidivism among women. It equips women to be able to find a job, hold a job, re-enter into the real world. The programs that are most effective are those that also include therapeutic interventions that address in a gender-responsive manner the issues of trauma, relationships, parenting, substance abuse, and mental health needs of women. We have an exemplary program at the Fernhurst YWCA here in Honolulu that has demonstrated that gender-responsive furlough programs can achieve a low rate of recidivism among their graduates. So we urge you to support this bill and to make this type of furlough program available to more women. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have ACLU of Hawaii in support. Okay. Members, any questions? Yep, report.
To the last testifier drinking her drink. Sorry, I forgot your name, but the question is, do you have a differential between the women recidivism rate and the men recidivism rate, regardless of age and et cetera?
Yeah, I can tell you that the last numbers that we have are from a couple of years ago, and the women's recidivism rate was 51%.
So that's much better than the men then, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
well,
correct?
It is, but 51% still doesn't sound very good to us.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to tell the story that I usually do. If you went to the doctor and 50 to 70% of the time they didn't heal you, you'd stop going to the doctor. And that's kind of an opinion I have of the way we quote rehabilitate people who would then turn around and go back again. Thank you for all that you do for the prisoners.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Yes. If not, let's move on to SB 2641 SD2 HD1 relating to the judiciary. First up, we have the Department of Public Safety with comments.
Good afternoon again, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Max Otani, Department of Public Safety. We offer comments. Specifically, it's we're not aware of any program that would take mother and child when the mother is still on inmate status. So that is a concern to us at this point. Be available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
and that's all the testifiers here today. Members, any questions?
Oh,
Get right back from
I'm sorry. DHS did not testify.
They did not. Well, they testified in written only.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Otani then. There are a lot of, I guess this bill tries to keep the mother and the child together while they're going through these programs. Are these programs part of the court order?
If it's part of the court order, then it would be under the judiciary. But normally, when the mother is sentenced to prison, they fall, well, not normally. When the mother is sentenced to prison, they fall under our jurisdiction. And there's visitations, but we do not allow mothers to live with their children in prison.
Right. But the programs that they're citing in the bill is community-based furlough programs. That's not under you, right?
We run community-based furlough programs, but normally it's we parole female inmates to programs that work with mother and child.
And the residential drug treatment program is not under you.
Residential, when we parole them to the residential drug treatment program, our jurisdiction ends. They're no longer a furloughee, they become a parolee at that point. So it's a jurisdictional issue.
Okay, and same with the therapeutic community program.
The therapeutic community programs could be well, I'm not sure what a therapeutic community program is, but a therapeutic program within the facility is run by us, and we do not allow the child to live with the mother in the settings of the prison.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a follow-up question, kind of along the same lines. Or members, are there any other questions before? So I did read your testimony, and I am a little concerned about you saying that that Department of Public Safety is not able to perhaps provide adequate protection for the children who may be staying with the mothers, and then you're concerned about additional liability and also the safety of the child. Can you expand a little bit more on that, considering that it's these community programs rather than having the mother in prison?
Yeah, so the community programs that we're talking about are programs that the inmate is paroled to. So their status changes from the Department of Public Safety to the Hawaii Paroling Authority. So there are several programs out there in the community now that will take mother and child into the program.
So you're not saying that DPS can't protect them. You're just saying that it's out of your jurisdiction to protect them. Is that what your testimony is saying?
It's according to the court order, we accept the inmate and just the inmate, not the inmate and the child. So it would be, I'm not sure what the right word is, but it would be causing a great liability for us to allow the child to live within the prison if the child is not ordered there. And
but it doesn't seem like that's the
a child in an adult prison anyway. It would be against multiple laws and our policies.
The paroling authority that has jurisdiction, not except for one of the four programs.
Okay, yeah, I think that's one is just a little more clear. That's okay. We'll figure it out later. Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions?
May I present the testimony that Women's Prison Project sent in? Our testifier has not been able to get onto the link.
Who is the testifier?
Lynn Babington.
Hold on one second. Nick, is there a Lynn Babington on Zoom? Yeah. Yeah, you could, is that an appropriate chair? We are past that point already, but it is a written testifier. She just didn't indicate that she was going to be in Zoom or here to testify. Better. Okay, you can proceed, Linda.
Thank you so much. I did want to emphasize that in a previous hearing, we did recognize that issue with the furlough programs, and that and I believe that was removed from that version of the bill. What this is really aimed at is women who hopefully will be eligible to be either to be diverted from incarceration or who can be paroled into treatment programs. There are treatment programs that, well, I know of maybe 3 programs where women currently can have their young children with them. They're well supervised, there's care for the children, there's assessment of their developmental needs, and it reduces the trauma for the children and for the whole family, particularly for young children. We know that approximately 75% of the women who come into our prison system are mothers, and 60% of them were custodial mothers before they were incarcerated. So this is really a harm reduction bill to reduce the harm to the children who are likely, if they are separated from their mothers while they're incarcerated, are at high risk for more developmental delays, behavioral problems, health issues. There's a whole list of negative traumatic effects on children, particularly young children. So this bill is about increasing the capacity of programs to be able to have more community-based programs or expand current community-based programs that can allow young children to continue to remain in the custody of their mothers while they're in the program. And that is with supervision, including supervision from the court. So thank you so much for allowing me to testify.
Okay, thank you. Members, let's move on unless anyone has any questions to SB 2771 SD1 HD1 relating to risk and needs assessments for female offenders. First up, Department of Public Safety with comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Max Otani. We would stand on a written testimony offering comments. Also like to add that we have been in contact with Dr. Harbinger from the Criminal Justice Research Institute, and she's vaguely familiar with one pretrial risk assessment for females at this time. There's many, not many, but there are several other assessment tools out there, but I think it's pretty low as far as pretrial risk assessment tools. The information we provided in our testimony, currently we use the Ohio Risk Assessment Tool Forest Pretrial Assessment Tool, which is out of the University of Cincinnati. And we have not validated that for just the female population. So the information that we provided in there regarding appropriation of funds, that would be to conduct a study to validate the tool on just the female population. We've been using this tool now for approximately 10 years. It'll be available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Women's Prison Project and Support.
Yes, thank you. We are in support of this. And we would like to, we hope this implementation commission is passed because we would love to be able to assist the Department of Public Safety with the research and the information we have about risk assessments that are validated and are being used. And we would love to support you in the implementation of such a document. It's very clear in the research also that women are often being overclassified as high risk when male focused risk assessments are being used. We think this is really a critical issue actually, because it begins to influence the entire, this person's entire journey through the correction system. So we strongly urge that this bill be passed, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Yeah, thank you. Members, any questions? All right, seeing none, let's move on to what I believe is the last bill on the agenda. SB 3293, SD2HD1 relating to assistance for persons completing a term of imprisonment. First up, DOTAX with comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Teresa Zetwick on behalf of the Department of Taxation. We stand on our written testimony and are available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Department of Public Safety in support.
Hi, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Max Latani again, Department of Public Safety. We'll stand on our written testimony and support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And last up, the Women's Prison Project in support.
Yes, thank you again. So this is one of those bills that has traveled back and forth between different departments. As it's currently written, it's putting this project in the judiciary. In the last hearing that this bill had, language from the House bill, which was, sorry, I can't find the number of it right now. The House bill in the House insert, I'm sorry, the last hearing, they inserted language from a House bill that had been putting this in the judiciary because they were intending to ensure that the navigator positions that are mentioned in my testimony were included in the bill so that there was specific staff tasked with guiding these women through the process of actually being able to use all of these vouchers. But we respectfully recommend that it go back to the Department of Human Services because they are the experts in managing this type of program. And it's a more appropriate placement of it than the judiciary, which does not handle housing kinds of issues or childcare. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
I have a question.
Yep, Rep. Nakamura.
Yep, for the Women's Project. Thank you for your testimony. Your suggestion that this move from the judiciary to DHS, have you looked at whether TANF funds can be used for the purposes you've outlined, such as childcare, housing, and other credits?
I have not. There may be some restrictions within TANF around whether or not the person has been convicted of a felony. I'm not sure about that, but I know that DHS has testified on this bill in the past, and that they have said that they do have the capacity to manage this, but I do not have the answer to the TANF question. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? If not, I do have one for DOTAX.
Yes,
in your testimony, you suggested adding the SC2 version relating to the tax provisions. Can you expand on that a little bit? Why those provisions are necessary?
Yes, thank you for the question. Basically, the previous version had a more well outlined method for having all of the components verified prior to the tax being claimed. And so it just made it easier to administer the tax.
And are you asking us to replace the entire language that follows provisions 1 through 5? Was that your testimony?
No, this is only related to the tax provision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Members,
you.
any other questions? Okay, if not, let's recess for decision making.
Okay, reconvening the Committee on Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs for decision-making on our March 22nd agenda. We are in room conference room 325. First up is Senate Bill 2021, Senate Draft 1. Related to decreasing the payment amounts for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs pro rata share of the Public Land Trust. There are a number of concerns about the measure and quite a bit of disagreement. I think we'll need some time to. Oh. Huh? Oh, the people on the, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, this doesn't amplify anymore. Yeah. Okay. So there are a number of issues and concerns on this. I think I would like to take time between now and finance to kind of further work on this measure. So for the time being, there are a number of HMSO notes that I'd like to address. Note that the net receipts issue, lost that paper. Lost my notes. There it is. Okay. That for consistency, where receipts appears in the bill, we'll put net receipts for consistency. We'll delete language which is restates without substantive change on page 9, line 7. Insert 20% of the receipts of the Public Land Trust, or 377 7,750, or whichever is greater, language for consistency, where it does appear as $3,007,075 throughout. Add the definition of net receipts by inserting language includes monies that may be precluded by federal law, and delete language and context regarding misallocated, underreported, underpaid income, and inserting language transferring to OHA a blank specified amount from the carryover trust fund for the period between July 1st, 2012 through July 30, 2022. Members, any questions or comments?
Just for clarity, Chair, I think that's 3,775,000.
3,775,000. Yes.
Thank you.
Question, Chair.
Yes.
So net stays in, but you define it, or what? Because that was one
So
of the
for the-
objectionable parts.
Yeah,
to
so for the
OHA.
purpose of this, we just put net receipts instead of just receipts throughout the bill.
Sorry, net receipts instead of what? Gross, or it was a muffle?
So net, you want to answer?
Yeah, so Rep Board, all we're doing is clarifying, sometimes it says receipts instead of net receipts. We're just making it consistently net receipts throughout the bill. But so we are not addressing at this time the gross receipts versus net receipts. But I think Chair indicated that we will be working on it as it goes to finance.
Because net receipts can be so fungible. I mean, you can start saying, we want to back out salaries for this, we want to do transportation for that. I mean, if the intent is to whittle it down, I obviously it's got a lot of pukas, but
For this purpose, it's clarification of net receipts versus just receipts.
net receipts versus what?
Receipt.
Receipts. Not gross, but receipts. Okay,
Receipt.
that's also fungible, but okay. It's a work in progress.
Work in progress, yes.
Which is long overdue, actually. But the idea that they sit in a room and figure this stuff out, that was one of the suggested amendments by OHA, which probably makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and we'll have to, well, one, I'll have to see if that fits into this title.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2021 SD1 with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Rep. Ichiyama. Aye. Rep. Kobayashi is excused. Rep. Lopresti. Rep. Lowen. Aye. Rep. McKelvey. Aye. Rep. Nakamura.
Aye.
Rep. Takumi. Rep. Tokioka. Rep. Ward. Aye. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 2567, Senate Draft 1, related to the Hawaiian beneficiaries. The bill does contain a blank appropriation and a defective date. My only recommendation is that refer the effective date to January 1st, 2022. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2567 SD1 with amendments noted the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. SB 3247, Senate Draft 2, House Draft 1, related to Hawaiian Homelands. This bill already has a defective date, further defective to January 1st, 2022. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 3247 SD2 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Senate Bill 3195, Senate Draft 2, related to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. This is the geothermal exploration. Chair's recommendation is that we pass this as is. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair unamended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 3195 SD2 as is, noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
SB 3357, Senate Draft 2. Chair's recommendation is that we replace this bill with House Bill 2499, which the House Draft 1, which the committee passed earlier this year. And we did put in that the clarifying language that grant awards pursuant to this measure must be in conformance with the standards for the award of grants under state law. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 3357 SD2 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. SB 2115, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1, related to the room confinement of minors. On page 1, line 12, the word designated should be changed to designated, or design, from design to designated. Other technical amendments needed for clarity and consistency. And also the DOH amendment replacing mental health professional with qualified mental health professional or mental health professional supervised by a qualified mental health professional. Members, any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is pass SB 2115 SD1 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. SB 2481, Senate Draft 2, House Draft 1, related to youth crisis centers. This bill will need technical amendments needed for the purpose of clarity and consistency. Also, I'd like to put into the committee report that the Committee on Finance may want to consider appropriating additional staff and resources to the Office of Youth Services to accomplish this objective. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2481 SD2 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 2397, Senate Draft 2, House Draft 1, related to child custody. I'd like to input the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence amendments on page 4, line 13, delete nationally accredited from that phrase. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2397 SD2 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 1347, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1, related to sex trafficking prevention. Bill already has a defective effective date. I'd like to amend the bill to also, I guess, DOE provides training, but will require that DOE provide training. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 1347 SD1 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, SB 2770, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1, related to the Native Hawaiian Rehabilitation Programs. Chair's recommendation is that we move this as is. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as is.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2770 SD1 HD1 as is, noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. SB 3295, SD1 HD1 related to corrections. On page 5, line 19 and page 6, line 1, we'll insert state before correctional. The expending agency on this, I'd like to change to the judiciary. And that's all. Members, any questions or comments? Yeah, we'll put it as judiciary. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 3295 SD1 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 2639, Senate House Draft 1, relate to comprehensive offender re-entry system. The new statutory language refers to female offenders, which is the term used in the Hawaii statutes. However, a more inclusive term would be women offenders. And so throughout the bill, I'd like to change the term to women offenders for consistency. And that's all. Members, any questions or comments? Okay, if not, Vice Chair, as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2639 HD1 with amendments noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? The recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. SB 3294, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1, relating to reentry planning circles. Chair's recommendation is to pass this unamended. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair, as is.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 3294 SD2 HD1 as is, noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you very much. SB 2637, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1, related to public safety. In this bill, section 353-6.5 refers to female offenders, which, as the previous bill, is the term used in the Hawaii revised statutes. However, a more inclusive term would be women offenders. So I would like to change that to women offenders. Bill already contains a blank appropriation and a defective effective date. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair, as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2637 SD1 HD1 with amendments noted the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. SB 2641, Senate Draft 2, House Draft 1, relating to the judiciary. The previous committee recommended in its committee report that judiciary consider including appropriation into the Department of Public Safety. Please note that this measure's title is related to the judiciary, therefore an appropriation to the Department of Public Safety may be outside the bill's title. So we will probably take that advisement up with the Finance Committee. Otherwise, the recommendations to pass it as is. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair, as is.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2641 SD2 HD1 as is, noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, Senate Bill 2771, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1, related to risk and needs assessments for female offenders. And in this case, although women offenders may be a more inclusive term than female offenders, the bill's title refers to female offenders, so we cannot change that out. The recommendation to Finance is that we include $40,000 for a qualitative study and consider adding an appropriation section to the bill. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair, as amended. Oh, no, I don't. Yeah, we don't need to change it. I'm sorry.
As is.
As is.
Yep. Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 2771 SD1 HD1 as is, noting the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Senate Bill 3293, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 1 related, Senate Draft 2, House Draft 1 related to assistance for persons completing a term of imprisonment. Since the pilot program is established within the judiciary, references to department on page 5, line 1, line 11 and 16 and 17 should be changed to the judiciary, and the definition of department on page 6 should be deleted. On page 7, line 12, the reference to section E1 should be changed to section E. And we will reinsert the tax provisions from Senate Draft 2 as requested. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair as amended.
Chair's recommendation is to pass SB 3293 SC2 HD1 with amendments noted the previously excused member. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you very much, members. We are adjourned.